And our next speaker is Mr. Oliver Porter, who came all the way from United States, from the great state of Georgia, not Republic of Georgia, state of Georgia in the US. And he's a very special person. I think one of the weaknesses of our freedom movement is that we have these big concepts about how to change the world, sometimes how to fix the country, but we don't really have much ideas and solutions for the micro level, for the city level, for the municipal level, or the state level. We rather talk about these general implementations and big ideas, not that much about the micro scale. And Oliver is a person who actually deals with the regional level and how to implement ideas of free markets, ideas of better management, more freedom on the very local level. He created and implemented the public-private partnership model for the city of Sandy Springs in the state of Georgia. This is a city of around 100,000 people near Atlanta, and it was very, very successful. And now he's a main advisor for other cities in the United States as well as Japan that think about implementation of this model and conversion from the statist model into PPP model. And he also published 3 books on the matter, and I'm extremely happy to welcome him here. So he will talk to you about this freedom ideas on the region, in the regional level. How can we advance freedom there? Thank you very much.
You know, for all of my long life, at times I have found myself in situations, often when I had been transferred by my company or the military or whatever, when suddenly a small voice in my head would say, "Oliver, what the hell are you doing?" And often I didn't have an answer about why I was here. Today I have a very direct answer about why I am here. I am in a country that I have never visited. I'm in the beautiful city of Krakow. I am speaking to representatives of, I believe I heard, Ken, 22 countries, and that didn't even include Bronson, the independent socialist republic of Hawaii. So I am here with a message for you. I want to convince you, you as libertarians, to take an interest in local government. As was said, you have been dealing with some high-flying principles, international, national issues, but I want to convince you to start thinking and putting some resources into the area of local government. And I'm going to give you 3 reasons why you should, and then I'm going to tell you a little bit about how you can, and a little bit about what my experience in that regard is. And then if we have time at the end, I'm going to branch out, because I have branched out, and let you know a little bit about some of the things that are going on internationally in the area of free cities. So why should you be interested in local government? Well, first of all, you know, it's a much smaller thing than federal, but in the aggregate, it is huge. The budget for the combined cities and counties of in America actually exceeds the federal budget when you take out the Social Security and other welfare payments. The aggregate of all your local spending is greater than the huge federal budget of the United States. Can have a big impact there. Scott gave us a fantastic presentation last night on the controlling of tax policy, tax revenues. I approach it from a totally different direction. That's sort of the top down. I'm approaching it from the direction of how do you lessen cost. And if you can cut costs, then you can certainly reduce taxes. So, great inspirational talk on how to reduce taxes from the control standpoint. But let's get at the underlying cause of taxes, which is the cost often. So we'll talk about that a little bit. Secondly, what government really affects you the most? Your day-to-day life. It's your local government. Your roads, your sewers and water, your police, your fire, your transportation, your parks and recreation, all of those things that you deal with daily in a local government and you don't deal with daily on your federal government level. So it is a very important area of government for us. Now let me define for a second what I mean when I say local government. I am talking about that end of the tail producer of goods, not the big overarching scale, but the one that actually closest to you that is producing your services. And it may be in the United States a county, a city, a town, whatever. You may have different names for it in your country, but whatever is the final producer of your services as a citizen, that's local government. Most countries have at least 3 levels of government. If you're a country of any size, I guess maybe a Monaco or a Hong Kong probably combines that maybe into one, but you'll have a federal or central government. You will have a regional government, a state, a province, a department, what have you. And then you will have your cities and towns, your local government. You may be structured somewhat differently, but that's generally the way they are. So I'm talking about that third tier, that level closest to you as an individual. And you should be very concerned about it. The third reason you, as libertarians, should be interested in local government is you can more easily affect it. It's hard changing our central governments. It is very difficult. But you and a small group of people who are dedicated and like-minded can change local government. So it's doable, maybe is the right way of phrasing that. So there's 3 solid reasons. It's huge in the aggregate, it's most affecting of your life, and you can fix it. So, with those 3 things said, I hope at least I have your interest in the topic. Let me start talking about what we've actually done. Sandy Springs, Georgia was an existing community. I didn't build a town from scratch. It was an existing community of almost 100,000 people. That's a sizable town in my state. In fact, upon incorporation, we became the 5th largest city in the state at birth. So Sandy Springs had been desiring to form a city for many, many years, over a quarter century. Our leadership there in the community, volunteer leadership, had fought in the legislature, the state legislature, to get approval just to vote to have a referendum on forming a city. And it had been blocked every year for over 25 years. The controlling party in the state of Georgia had been in power for over 100 years. And it opposed the formation of the city, and basically the Speaker of the House, who was one of the more powerful people in the state, some thought even more powerful than the governor, said that Sandy Springs would become a city when pigs fly. I now have a wonderful collection of flying pigs. So they had blocked it. I came on the committee probably about 8 years before the city was formed, the organizing committee. And I began to ask the question, if we had a city, what would it be like? What would be its authority? What would this, what would its responsibilities? And everybody said, we don't know yet. We're just busy trying to get this through the legislature. Been fighting this battle, and so I said, well, we got to know what we want. I think that's a guiding principle. So how do we go about deciding? They said, well, probably need a charter commission. So how do we do that? Well, why don't you form it? So I did. I formed a charter commission. Great exercise. It was like writing the Constitution of the United States on the head of a pen. But we went back and really did our homework and looked into all of the possibilities. There had not been a city formed in Georgia in 50 years, so there was really no guideline. And we produced a charter that said what the responsibilities and what the authority of the city and many other things. That became a part of the bill. A couple more years passed, and finally the opposition party took control of the Senate and the governorship. And we thought, oh, maybe now we get it. So at a meeting I said to the group, you know, if we get this thing passed, how are we gonna do it? And they said, we don't know, we gotta get this thing passed. So I went home, literally, went home from that meeting, went down to my basement office, took out a long yellow pad, and created a design for how to start a city. Critical paths, per charge, all of that sort of thing you need to say, what services do we need and want, and how do we get there from here to there? Took it in, the committee passed it, and then we didn't get the bill through. Still blocked in the House. Next year I put a new date on it, the committee passed it, we didn't get the bill through. Then all of a sudden came the year 2004, elections. The Republicans finally took the House, and they told us that our bill would be number one. Number one. Now, problem is, we had no time now. And everyone looked around and said, where's that plan? And I said, well, here, you know, I got it. They said, well, will you be responsible for starting a city? And I said, yeah, except for two things. I need a title, because no one in other cities will even speak to me. And they said, okay, you can be interim city manager, no pay, but you can have the title. And I accepted, and I said, but the second thing is we have no time, and we cannot do this by committee. If you want me to do it, get out of the way and let me do it. Very reluctantly, they agreed to that. I think believing that it wouldn't happen anyway, they still do it. So I began to think, how can I start the city? There were some small problems there in the legislation. First, the referendum wouldn't take place until June 8th, and we had to have a city December 1st. You can count the months on one hand before you were able to do it. But the more prevailing problem, the big problem, was the bill gave no one any authority to do anything until the moment the city was started. Midnight, December 1st, we had to have a fully operational city of 100,000 people. And until that time, we could not hire anyone, we could not buy any equipment, we could not buy a building, we could do nothing officially until that moment. How do you get from here to there in 1 minute? So I began to look for alternatives to the traditional bureaucratic form of local governments that we have and have all over the world. Just your bureaucracy at work. And I guess it was my corporate background. I had spent my career with AT&T, which at the time, before the government broke us up, we were the largest company in the world with over 1 million employees. So I know the corporate world, I know the resources that it has, I know what it can do if it wants to. So I sat down and wrote a letter to 24 CEOs and presidents, I know enough not to go at the bottom with something like this, and said, here are 2 questions. Here are 12 services I have outlined that we will need. Let me know where you've done any of these. Another city, state, whatever, military, whatever. Second question was what we in the United States would call a Lulu. It said, would you be willing to spend the millions of dollars in resources to start our city without a contract? Because I cannot, and no one can give you a contract until that moment. Well, surprisingly, I got 12 responses of the 24 saying, here's where we've done some services. No one had done them all. No one had even done the majority of them, but some of them had done 2 or 3. In answer to the second question, would you do it without a contract? No one said yes, but some of them said things like, well, we can talk about it, we'll negotiate, whatever, see what you need. I took that as a yes. I retreated once again to my basement office, and I began to write RFPs. Now, if that's a term you don't recognize, that's the description of the services you will need that the companies can use to form their bids, to form their proposals, the request for proposal. They were about that thick by the time I finished. The governor had appointed a commission to assist with the city, but unfortunately it had no authority. But I was asked to form it. I was elected chair because none of the other 4 had anything to do with the city, so I didn't even live there. And at that first meeting on June the 29th, remember, city December 1st, June 29th, two important things did happen. They elected me chair, and the second one was I put those RFPs on their desk and said, you must pass these tonight. You don't have time to read them. Nancy Pelosi-like. So they were a bright group, even though they were inexperienced, and they did pass them. And the next morning I issued the RFPs, and they went out to companies. No company, one of the big problems I've had over time is finding companies that realize that they can do this, because this has not been a core business for them. I had to convince them that they could do it. And I would say such things as, well, do you do human resources? Yeah, personnel, yeah, IT, well, man, farm that out, administration, down the list. They say, and I say, okay, you don't do road paving, right? No, we don't do that. Well, but do you do project management? Well, yeah, we manage projects. Then that's all. We're going to have subcontractors, and you're going to manage them. We ended up with 13 subcontractors, one general contractor for the whole thing. And I do recommend that for a startup city, so that it's not this, somebody else's fault. You got one guy you can strangle and say, you are responsible for giving us what you promised. So, but they had many subcontractors. We went through the bid process, did a wonderful selection effort between the bids. We did have competing bids, and that's the way you control your cost. There is no corruption there. There's no attempt at anyone to pad the bill. They have to compete, and compete hard for your business. They did it. We selected them. We did not actually select, well, we couldn't fully select them. We didn't have the authority. We reported, the selection committee reported to the Governor's Commission on September 29th. This is the company we recommend. 3 months later, they had to have a city. They could not approve it. They could only approve passing it on to the future city council. So it was actually 3 weeks after the city was formed that the contract was let. So 1 minute after midnight, December 1st, we sat in a fully equipped council room with hundreds of people, standing room only, at 1 minute after midnight, there to see it happen. And the city of Sandy Springs was born, and that city council had a fully operational city around them the minute they sat down. Let me now tell you what has transpired. In the intervening period, in the first 10 years after that, to start with, Sandy Springs did not raise taxes to form the city. We accepted the portion of the taxes that the county had been allocating to our services. Did not raise taxes. We call them millage rates in America. It's one part per 1,000, 1% per 1 part per 1,000. Did not raise taxes to start with, has not raised taxes, not 1/1,000% since the city was formed 13 years ago. While this country went through a recession, many cities and counties had tremendous problems, primary financial problems, primarily generated by the fact that they had unfunded liabilities for pensions and other benefits. I'm happy to report, after those 10 years, Sandy Springs had not raised taxes, had improved services in every level, had been able to dedicate 20% of our operating income to capital improvements, new roads, parks, sidewalks, what have you, things we desperately needed, all out of that original taxation, and had zero debt or long-term liabilities. I had to borrow $10 million the first day because we had no revenue. We had zero revenue when we started. Paid it back December 31st, and we've never gone into debt again. Until 2 years ago, the city leaders made the decision to rebuild the downtown, an enormous building that the city desperately needed. We had no real center of town. 1940s, 1950s strip malls, Americans will recognize that, just no identity. So we've got a fantastic new building that just opened in the last couple of months. It houses our city hall administration, but more importantly, it is a community center. Huge arts auditorium, 2 of them, many meeting places for the community. It is a joint project, a PPP, with private industry. The back part of that whole area is apartments, 3 levels of underground parking that we desperately needed, retail shops. It will be a revenue source for the city. We hated to have to borrow, but we had needed $200 million to do that. But the good news there is it was the perfect time to borrow. Interest rates had troughed, and our city, the only one in the nation to receive a AAA rating as a new city, bond rating. Those of you who understand, maybe some don't understand, but that lets you sell your bonds at the cheapest possible interest rate. So we have an interest rate that is so low that this entire project is now costing us less, the interest on that, than we were paying on rent before that for our city hall. So I think even though we do have some debt finally, it was debt well spent. What else has happened? Well, I said service has improved. Every internal survey or even national survey in which we have participated puts us in the top 10 to 25% in the nation in citizen satisfaction. Now, building a little on John's presentation earlier today on the subsidiary thing, I have 2 philosophies going into this. One, efficiency, and we've met that test. But 2, bring the government as close to the people as possible. That is consistent with the subsidiary thinking. It's maybe a simpler way of saying it. Before we became a city, were part of a county of 900,000 people, badly treated by that county. It took our tax money and spent it elsewhere. We were represented, one person represented 180,000 people. Now, and we didn't even live in our community. Now, after this, all the council lives in the community. They represent 1 per every 15,000, and none of them lived in originally, and I think still probably more than 2 miles, 3 kilometers from a constituent. One of the pitches I would make as we set up the city to the community was we could get our hands around their necks, and we literally can, because we know where they're hiding. So it is consistent with the subsidiary theory of bringing government closer to the people. Because of our success, the next year 2 more cities were formed, principal advisor to all of these. The next year the 4th one, skipped a year, and then we got the 5th one. 6, there are now 10 new cities surrounding Atlanta, with a population of over 500,000 people, basically following this model that we created for Sandy Springs. It works. And I would encourage you to begin to look at how it works, to the extent that we are saving 10 to 40% of the cost of local government over comparable bureaucratic forms of government. How is that possible? They can't be earning a profit and still doing it that way. Yes, they can. The profit motive drives it. Before, we had bureaucrats who could care less, in some cases, how they served. But that's not fair to them, because so many of them have come to me and said, when I was in a bureaucratic government, I tried to suggest better ways to do my job, and nobody cared, and I finally gave up. Now, the companies are begging them for ideas of how to do it more efficiently. Why? Because there's a profit motive. They make more money if they could be more efficient. It drives behavior, folks. Drives it strong. The morale is so good compared to the bureaucratic cities around us that the citizens see it. They don't even think of these employees as not being city employees. They are their employees. My favorite example of the difference before and after. If you had a you understand the word pothole, chuck hole in your road, you need it fixed, you could call the county, and maybe in about 6 months, a crew of 8 people would show up. 1 of them would be working. The other 7 would be supervising. That's not an exaggeration. The day after, when the city of Sandy Springs, you called in a pothole, and you had someone out there within a couple of days, there would be a two-man crew. They would have a shirt that said Sandy Springs. They would have a truck with a magnetic sign that said Sandy Springs. They'd fix it. The next day, that same two-man crew might be in the adjoining city of Johns Creek. Johns Creek Church, they fix their pothole. The third day, and here's the beauty, they might be in a private parking lot fixing potholes with whatever that company's name was. Absolute maximum use of personnel. Absolute maximum use of equipment. We don't own any equipment, any road equipment, any kind of equipment. It's all provided under the contract. It's maximization of efficiency. What are the services included under the contracts? Well, general administration, HR, human resources, public relations, information technology, roads, not only the paving of roads, but the traffic design, traffic control, their parks and recreation. Something goes under the general heading of the zoning. If you don't understand zoning, that means it's some control over whether you can have a residence or an apartment or industrial, commercial. There, it's an important part of planning, the code enforcement for that. All of those things are in this big contract that has proved to be so efficient that, as I said, 9 other cities have now seen the benefit and come in line. To show you some of the financial benefit even further, we have not increased our taxes at all. The remaining unincorporated portion of Fulton County in that same 10-year period increased their taxes 250%. 2.5 times the rate that we are charging to our citizens. So it works, folks, and I want you to begin to think, hey, if we could influence on a piecemeal basis, yes, but because it's small enough that we can get our hands around it, if we can begin to influence local government, maybe we can make this sucker trickle up to state and federal government and show the benefits of doing this. Your citizens will be much happier. They really will be, and you will have much capacity to reduce rates. Now, did they always reduce rates? No. We still have the traditional 3 tiers of local government. There are the elected officials who set policy, the budget. There is an administrator, a city manager, county administrator to carry out that policy. The third tier normally is the workforce, the bureaucratic workforce. In our case, we've simply substituted the contract for the workforce. So I went back after several years to our council and said, let's reduce taxes. And I think in this case, it turned fine. We were right in the middle of the recession at that point when I mentioned that so many cities were in trouble. And they were reluctant. They were building a reserve. And they said, we really need a reserve. We know we're eventually going to need to do something downtown. We'd like to keep the taxes, but in effect, bank the extra money. And they did that and built up that $45 million reserve that let us go forward with this other project. But there are many ways that the elected officials could have spent that money. They could have cut taxes. They could have increased services even more. They could have had more capital expenditures. You know, they could cut, they could increase pensions if they wanted to. But we are not, will never have a pension problem. There are basically 2 forms of pensions. A defined contribution, which says what you put in is what you're going to get out, basically. And a defined benefit, which says in advance, we tell you what we're going to pay you when you retire. And that's what's got the world in trouble, is because the politicians are promising too much, and there's no money to pay for it. The Social Security system of the United States is broke. It doesn't have money to pay, so it has to print new money to be able to pay for things they promised in the past. We're not ever going to be in that situation because the company is responsible for the pensions. I should point out that our police and fire are not under the contract, as are not our courts, but we do have, in those cases, defined contribution plans, so they will not build up a negative reserve in those either. So it's worked beautifully. I've been involved then with other areas of the country trying to convince people to do this. I'm often asked, isn't it more difficult to convert an existing city to the contract model than it was to start it? Well, no, it's much easier to convert it. Everything's already there. You just go in and change who's doing it. But there is one problem with converting a city. It comes down to one word. It's called politics. Mm-hmm. Existing politicians do not wish to stick out their neck and propose something radically different when they can just keep riding along and taking advantage of their citizens forever because they don't know any better. It's just a matter of political will, and it's very difficult to get people to change that. I'm working with a tax reform group down in Florida, and they have been pushing hard to get, and they've actually asked me to conduct studies of the first city there. Small city, only 12,000 people, $2 million a year they could be saving. And that's real money on their budget, $2 million a year. And the way I conduct that study is basically take their budget, dollar for dollar, for the services that we're going to pull out. And then I have the ability to look at contracts we've already issued, put them on a per capita curve so I can match it to this city's size and see what it should cost for a contract city versus what it's really costing them. And I tell you, it usually runs 10 to 40% savings. In fact, I've made the offer, and I'll stand by it, to do all the work for these cities. Write their RFPs, help them through the selection process, help them through the contract negotiations, and implement the city for nothing. All I want is 1% of their savings. That's 1% they would have never had. They'll still get 99%. I'll do all that because I am so sure that I could make a lot of money doing that, because I know the savings will be there. I'm putting, my feet where my mouth is on this thing. I'm really believe in it that it will do that. But even with that sort of offer, it's difficult to get the political politicians to change. That's where people like yourselves and other groups, local groups, but that's where people, you could be the nucleus around which was formed a movement to take your government from wasteful bureaucracy into a well-oiled and well-designed city. So I charge you to be thinking about that. Now let me shift gears just a little bit and talk about, international. It was mentioned I've written some books. Actually, I've done a fourth book, which was translated into Japanese, and it combines my first two books. I can't read a word of it. But I'm proud to announce that I am told that on the second month of its publication, it made the top 10 bestsellers in Japan in the government genre, in the government type. I have no way of proving that, but I am on my tombstone having it engraved, best-selling international author. And as an engineer, I never thought I would write a book, so that's quite a thing. I didn't intend to write a book, by the way. I was, as I mentioned, advising these other cities, and I started writing down all these instructions, and pretty soon it became a book. So I published it, and I would encourage you, if you want to learn anything about it, you might want to read that book. It's probably the better of the three. The first book is on creating new cities. The second book, written primarily at the request of the Japanese people contacts, is called Public-Private Partnerships for Local Government, and that is about converting cities. And the third book is an e-book, probably only about 30 pages, and it just it's not a how to do it like the first two. It sort of summarized the concepts behind the contract cities, and it's called that, just simply the contract cities, and all are in my name, and you can look them up on Google if you like. In part because of the books, but mostly because of word of mouth. People like Ken and Lee are nice enough occasionally to tell somebody. And by the way, you all maybe are going to Mongolia. Well, we had the Silk Road Foundation from Mongolia come to visit Sandy Springs about a month ago. Did a television interviews with us. We've had people from all over the world coming in, all over the country, because it is a unique system of government. So because of that, I've become involved in half a dozen projects internationally. Myanmar, recently possibly some in Puerto Rico, Eastern Europe, but the most important, and oh, I have to mention the oddest city, seasteading. How many of you know about seasteading? I went out to Tahiti last year. They proposed to build cities on the ocean. All of these cities I'm talking about are what we call free cities or autonomous or city-states. They are Hong Kong or Singapore-like. In fact, at a recent conference I called it Hungapore. And the closest we've come to that now is going to be in Honduras. A venture capitalist fund has been formed to actually invest money in free cities. First time that I'm aware of that, and that's an important step. I tried for years to think of a way to get third-party financing. We finally got it. I've gone on the board of that, and we have become the first either company or country to be approved under the Honduran new law called ZEDI, or Zone of Economic Development, which allows us to create a free city. And by free city, I mean we will have our own taxation, our own laws, even our own currency if we want, probably a cryptocurrency. And certainly limited regulations. So we think with those things we can attract industry, business, tourism people into an area that has been very difficult to do development, real safety problems. We have acquired land and have begun that process, and it's exciting. It's exciting to be a part of it, to be on their board of directors. So things are spreading out slowly. I have never tried to market this concept per se. One, I'm too darn old to even start something new like that. But I have tried to spread the, somebody used the term Johnny Appleseed earlier in a different way. I've tried to be the Johnny Appleseed of contract cities. Spread the word. And with that, I have gone, I would love to have an hour's questions, but I only have maybe 10 or 12 minutes, so let me open the floor now for questions. Please, yes, sir.
That's what an accomplishment. That's really great. In California, virtually every employee at any level of the government is unionized. There would be furious opposition.
Absolutely.
You did not have that in Georgia, maybe?
No, we don't allow unions in the state. We actually do allow them, but we don't encourage them, and we've been a right-to-work state for forever. So it's much easier there. I will admit to the difficulties of dealing with the unions. However, I don't think it's insurmountable. I think if we can begin to show the citizens the benefits, they're going to have to overcome that union opposition. But it is certainly more difficult. I was telling, is that your wife?
Yes, it is.
Well, lucky guy.
Yeah,
that's
what I say.
I was telling her that I'm having a group from California come to visit Sandy Springs in the next 2 months, and we're hoping to plant that seed out there. But the highly unionized states, the Northeast, the West Coast, are more difficult because of the union situation. One question, if I could ask my own question, I always get, what about the existing employees when you convert a city? Oh, boo-hoo. No, I tell the elected officials, your responsibility, sure, you want to be kind here, but your responsibility is the people who elected you and pay your salary. It's to the citizens. And yeah, we'll treat the employees well. Normally, 80 to 90% of those employees will be reemployed. The deadwood will be gone because they won't be productive, and goodbye to them. And there are ways to mitigate that. In a Japanese city that we came very close to converting, and then the tsunami hit, and then the officials who had been elected, who were favorable, got voted out, and so we missed out. But in that particular city, they were having an industry come in that needed 2,000 employees. And we said, okay, let's promise that industry that we will retrain the city employees who are going off the payroll to work for you. It's a win-win. So there are a lot of things you can do to mitigate the impact on the existing employees. I think here and then back there.
I'm interested in your thoughts about some of the corporate cities. The one that comes to mind, of course, is Celebration, the Disney invention in the swampland of northern Florida, which is over 100,000 hectares. And that structure has a legal identity. It's recognized in a lot of things. What do you think about that versus what you did?
Well, it's fine if you have a Disney to do it. It's going to take money to do that. We will have a corporate structure in Honduras. It will not be, although there will be eventually some elected officials, the initial board that will run that city is corporately appointed by our venture capital group.
So does Celebration work? Is it a successful
I think so.
city?
I think so. I haven't heard anyone say, it's not. I haven't been down there. It is a little different thing. What he's talking about, a big company, in this case Disney, basically buys a huge hunk of land and says, we're going to build a city here, and we will run that city. And when you buy in, you understand. The beauty of the corporately run city is basically you'll have a contract agreement between every citizen and the government, in effect. And it is enforceable with international law. One of our great concerns was that you'd get a change of government in Honduras and they'd throw the whole thing out. Well, we've come to an agreement. I went down to help negotiate it. For 70 years, we will be in control. Now, they could still, with the military, move in and throw us out maybe, but we do have the international courts on our side due to the contract law that we were getting in place. Jack, let me go back to the fellow at the back there, way back.
Thank you, Mr. Porter, for your presentation. The PPP has proven to work in some part of the developing world, and I can speak for Ghana as an example. But there are a lot of challenges. One, like weaker institutions. Two, we have officials are usually appointed by the central government as opposed to the people electing the local government. Now, what mechanisms can a country like that deploy to make the PPP work efficiently?
Well, the contract method would work great for you. Getting it in your situation is going to be more difficult. Even though it's difficult to get through our state legislature, it took us all those years, we at least, once we had their approval, we had basically an official approval to do it. In an undeveloped country, the government is so fluid and things change so that it's probably difficult for you to get the approval to start the city. But if you can, then the contract method is the most efficient way for you to actually do it. But I don't have any insight into how you would get through your legal mechanisms with your government to actually set up the city. I'm not familiar with it.